Good evening, everyone. Thanks for sticking around. I am last. We can all guarantee that anyway, right? I was looking at some name badges as we walked around tonight. I see different officials from towns, cities, villages, probably some county officials here today. Open meeting law is open meeting law for all of you. It's all the same. So just remember that as I go through it. If I inadvertently refer to towns in particular, I'm not picking on towns or anything. Far from it. I'm just used to talking to that crowd in particular. But open meeting law is open meeting law. Anyway, I'm glad to be here tonight. I'm very pleased to follow our past speakers, the Bakke Norman guys, and also Kevin Kennedy. I appreciate that you have this event, and I appreciate being invited and talk to you guys up here. So in the materials on open meeting law, there's two things. It's in the back there. One is a copy of the slides I'm going to go through. And then there's another thing, which is a fact sheet from the UW Extension Local Government Center, which is another group that we often work with and provide a lot of basic education to local officials. So it's one of those 10-page handouts that's written in normal language for normal people. So it's a great reference to have both for you and if you want to distribute it further. It's available on their website as well. So for tonight, I'm going to go over kind of some reminders on what the concept and the basics of open meeting law is. I'll point out a few highlights are the major errors or the most common errors that I tend to see in what I do, and probably the rest of us as well. So let's get right into it. I'll get you out of here by midnight. All right, just starting out open meeting policy. You have to go through the policy because it's really understand the scope of this law and what it's doing. And I just put it in there, and I'm just going to read it. It's very broad. In recognition of the fact that a representative government of the American type is dependent upon an informed electorate, it is declared to be the policy of the state that the public is entitled to the fullest and most complete information regarding the affairs of government as is compatible with the conduct of governmental business. Kevin Kennedy mentioned to start out tonight how Wisconsin has a very strong tradition of open and transparent government. He was talking about ethics. I'm talking about open meeting law, but the same concept is really present here as well. Public records law, too, we'll save that for maybe next year. And you can see that in the policy statement. This is the opening statute in open meeting law. This is our policy. So it's one of the most expansive policies in the country, okay? When people talk about the Freedom of Information Act, that's actually the federal version of this law that's applicable to federal agencies. This is Wisconsin open meeting law, and it's at the state level, and we're one of the broadest, most liberal out there of any state in our policy. And the kicker is the next quote here. This subchapter, i.e. open meeting law, shall be liberally construed to achieve the purpose set forth in this section. What's that mean? It means in general, when you have a close call, it's open, right? It's a meeting. So that's when you have a close call, it's an open meeting that needs to be noticed. That's what that means. Not just your own judgment, but if there's a complaint, this is how district attorneys are going to look at it. This is how courts are going to look at it. So you got to keep that in mind. When in doubt, probably an open meeting that needs to be noticed. So, simple formula here. Whenever you have, number one, a governmental body, and number two, it's having a meeting, below the line there, that equals it must be properly noticed in advance. Okay? Simple formula there. Not so simple or I wouldn't be here tonight, right? I have those words, governmental body and meeting, in quotation marks because they are defined in the statutes, and from those definitions is how you can start to see how expansive this stuff is. Governmental body. This is another quote from the statute. I just put it all there so you'd have it. Let me parse it a little bit, though. It names just about every type of governmental body you can think of, which is all well and good. But remember, this is expansive. It's liberally construed. It doesn't really matter what it's called. It doesn't really matter. It matters how it was created. Created by Constitution, state constitution, statute, ordinance, rule, or order. If it was created by a government or a governmental type document, then it's a body. That's the definition of governmental body. So a lot of times we have questions, we have this type of committee, it doesn't even have town officers on it, or we have this committee and it's got just citizens on it. They're not subject to open meeting law, are they? Of course they are. How was it created? It was created by a rule or order of probably the town board, county board, village board, city council. It's how it's created. So I can tell you that when you have these ad hoc citizen groups that have no connection to the local government and probably just spontaneously erupt to give the local government some grief, they're not subject to open meeting law because you didn't go out there and create them. Okay? So that's the difference. There's also some further definitions. A quasi-governmental corporation, I don't think that affects any of you here, but it could someday if you have partnerships, different type of entities that you try to create to take on some tasks. Again, this is a spin-off of the government not subject to open meeting law, and oftentimes they are. So when in doubt, it applies. And that's the second bullet point here. Here's a long definition, but just cut to the chase here. If it's created by a government, or it even walks and talks like a government, according to the state Supreme Court, then we're going to say open meeting law applies. All right? Next definition, second part of our formula, what's a meeting? And I also put, just quote right out of the statute so you have it. The convening of members of the body for the purpose of exercising responsibilities, authority, power, etc. And in the statute it says if one half or more are present under the statute, it's a meeting. If all there is one half present or more, it's a meeting. There are some exceptions here that I want to take note of. For example, are you having a meeting right now? However, the term meeting does not include any social or chance gathering or conference, which is not intended to avoid this subchapter. And of course, there's court cases and other AG opinions that make this even seem more liberal than what I just read in the statute, which I'll get into in a moment. But what does this mean? These exceptions here, social, chance gathering, or a conference, we're going to call this a conference. So if you have one half or more of your body members here, you're not violating the law just by being here because you're here to attend this conference. Same thing with a social or chance gathering, especially in a small community. You might end up at the post office at the same time. You might be at the same wedding. So are you violating the law? If you're meeting one of those exceptions, no. With the caveat, as long as that meeting is not intended to avoid the subchapter. So even though you're here at a conference and you're meeting that exception, if during the timeout you start talking about a governmental matter and that's not noticed, now you're violating the law anyway. So you have to remember to talk about the Brewers or the Twins or the Packers when you're having these other meetings or these conferences to meet that exception. So, governmental body and a meeting. There's two elements here. If you have two elements, open meeting law applies. If you're engaging in governmental business, including actions as well as discussion, it's one of the most common questions. We're just discussing. There won't be any action. The law still applies. Okay? You can talk as much as you like. The public has a right to sit there and watch you talk. Second, a number of body members present that is sufficient to determine the outcome. I mentioned in the statute that if at least one half of you are there, presumed to be a meeting. Well, it even gets to a higher standard than that because we have some votes where you need less than half of the people to control the vote. Let's say you have a proposal to amend the budget. That requires a 2/3 vote of the members of the body. That's a supermajority. Doesn't require 51%, it requires 66.7%, right? So in that instance, if you have a 5-person board, for example, a normal vote would be 3 people. So often, for most subjects, 2 people on that 5-person body are not going to be enough to be having a meeting. But if they start talking about maybe amending the budget, those 2 people could be a meeting, because 2 people is enough to determine the outcome. That's what's called a negative quorum, right? Because in a 5-person body, at least 4 people got to vote one way to approve that vote. So then 2 people could get together and throw the whole vote. So that's a quorum and a negative quorum. Other things to watch out for. Sometimes the governing body, especially when we were talking earlier tonight with county zoning, for example, the governing body may want to go to another governing body's meeting to observe and watch what's going on. Your town board might want to show up at the county zoning proceeding to see how they're going to handle it. If you know in advance that a quorum of your body is going there to watch it, that's what's called an informational meeting. And that's supposed to be noticed. It notices your public of where the quorum of the body is going to be to learn pertinent information. So they may want to go too. That's the point. Another one, modern technology has made this all much more horribly complex, or at least easy to violate the law. Telephones. Now, obviously, if you get together in person and talk and decide an outcome that's unnoticed, that's going to be a violation. Telephone's no different. The real problem that we see, and it's probably not even as big a problem because we've got worse problems now, has been email. Because we send emails so quick and easy. And everyone sends an email, you hit reply all, send a response, somebody else hits reply all. Now we're having a discussion that's not been noticed to the public, and that's a violation. So you really have to watch out for email. Why do I say email is probably not even our biggest problem? Well, now we've got social media. You know, if you're chatting on Facebook or something, that's no different than having that discussion otherwise. So that meeting of the minds to talk about the action or the matter of governmental business without notice to the public, that's the violation. One thing I do want to point out here, because people get a little bit paranoid sometimes that they can't even run into the other person. Remember, you've got your exceptions, chance, social, conferences. You've also got your one-way communication. Very, very common for a body to get their packet of information in advance to review it before the meeting. That's not a problem. Okay, I encourage you to do that. Your meetings go faster, right? A one-way communication is not a problem. You might have some issue going on, and maybe someone's going to update other people on what's going on in the community. That one-way communication, not a problem. Once you reply to it and you start having a discussion, you're going to have a problem. So one-way information, not an issue. So now that we're having a meeting, because we have a governmental body that's got enough people to determine an outcome, we have to notice it in advance. What do you got to have in the notice? Time, date, place, and subject matter. What does that really come down to? An agenda with the time, date, and place, right? The person responsible to make the notice is the chief presiding officer of the body. Town chair, village president, city mayor, county board chair, chief presiding officer. Do those people sound like the people who make the notices in your community? Probably not. Because the statute also says that person or their designee. Does the designee sound like one of these? Town clerk, village clerk, city clerk, county clerk? Right. So that's why those people are doing it. They're the designee of the chief presiding officer. I just put in quotes here, all items listed for discussion or possible action. A lot of people get the question, should we list whether we're going to take action or just discuss something for each item on the agenda? I would just use a blanket statement like this on the top or the bottom, and then you got your bases covered. The problem when you start listing for different topics that you're only going to discuss it, well, now maybe you're at the meeting and having discussed it, you really need to act on it, and you've boxed yourself into a corner because you put on the agenda that you would not act on it. Don't do that to yourself. Open meeting law is not something to hate. It's for the benefit of the public. But to make your government too inefficient to even operate is just not worth it. Use a blanket statement like that at the top or the bottom of your agenda, and you're good. Highly recommend that. Another point, we need to err on the side of being more descriptive. Remember this liberally construed stuff? Take it this way too when you're forming your agenda. And I know this is still a problem because I get around and I see agendas that are problems, too often, all too often. What am I talking about? Chair's report, treasurer's report, fire chief's report. That's not a good topic. That's not a good way to list your agenda. If the fire chief is going to have a report at the meeting, what are they going to report on? Well, they report on what calls were made. They report on what happened at this meeting, how the training went. Then list that. That's what you list in your agenda. If you know what the guy is going to talk about, that's what you list. That's how the public is informed as to what's going to happen there. Fire chief's report does not do it. Okay? And that's not me preaching. That's courts and AG opinions preaching, okay? You need to be more descriptive. When in doubt, be more descriptive. That's the rule. Last here. Open meeting law actually says that whenever you have a meeting, you have to have it according to open meeting law and any other statutes that may apply. So when you're wondering what kind of notice is required for a meeting, you have to always check to see if there's a specific statutory requirement. We mentioned zoning earlier tonight. In all the zoning ordinances, it's required to have a Class 2 notice first. Right? Class 2 notice. That's how you know. You look at the statute. For a lot of things you're going to try to look up, there isn't a statute that mandates how much time is involved. In which case, you just default to the normal statute, which we're going to get to next. Okay? So keep that in mind. If there's a specific statute, you got to follow that. If not, you default to the standard open meeting law. There's a lot of opinions out there, by the way, that you need to be simultaneously doing both. So when you have that zoning meeting, public hearing, 2 weeks advance notice, people will put up a separate notice for open meeting law. I think you should be able to combine those into one, personally, but there are people that cover their bases by doing more. So let's talk about your timelines here, because that's where it really hits the fan. First of all, in the statute, there's 3 separate and distinct elements of open meeting law notice for every single open meeting. Every single time, there's 3 elements to meet. First element, most people are good at, notice to the public. This is, in general, for just about all towns and villages, at least. Either posting it in at least 3 places in the jurisdiction or using that newspaper ad. One of those at least accomplishes notice to the public. That's one element here. Second thing, if any reporter has a written request on file with the municipality to get sent the agenda every time, you need to send them the agenda every time. That one's kind of rare, so people forget about that, but it's because you don't have anything written on file. Number 3, the third thing, in addition to everything else, you need to send a copy of that agenda to a news medium that covers your area. An official newspaper, if you have one. Most towns and villages are not required to even have an official newspaper. Okay? In your case, if you have an official newspaper, that's where you'd send it. If you don't, just some news medium, a newspaper, radio, TV, but TV cameras, I know what you're thinking. TV cameras are at our town hall all the time already. Just joking. But if you start sending them this notice, they're not going to be at your town hall all the time either. All right? What this is it's a heads up notice to that news medium. Presumably, if they were to think something on your agenda is particularly interesting, maybe they would show up. Okay? But if you do notice to the public, if you're a town or village that posts your notices, and you're posting 15 different places inside your town, and you fail to do number 3, you still didn't follow the law. You still violated the law. Okay? And that counts as a violation, just as any other. It's just as bad a violation as if you didn't put an ad in a newspaper or didn't post. So people forget about number 3 all the time. I want to emphasize that it's just that heads up notice. They're not required to do anything with it. You're not required to pay them at all. So if you're posting for number 3, if you just send an email to that newspaper, you're done. An email is a great way to do it because then you have a record that you did it, if anyone asks. So don't forget number 3. I'm still on number 3 because this is what everyone forgets. Not everyone, but lots of people. Okay? So every single time you have an open meeting. Next thing is, when do you do this? At least 24 hours in advance. At least 24 hours in advance. Now, the only exception to at least 24 hours in advance is in those quoted right out of the statute, so we don't misunderstand each other. If, quote, for good cause, such notice is impossible or impractical, end quote, no less than 2 hours. So never, ever, ever in the history of the world in Wisconsin can you post a meeting with less than 2 hours notice. When can you use somewhere between 24 and 2 hours? That's the definition. So I'm just going to tell you, it better be an emergency, right? It better be something good. That's what I'm telling you. Something that's not good. And here's an example ripped from the headlines, or a court case, as it were. They posted that short 2-hour notice because they needed to get out of town for some fishing. That was not good enough. Okay, that was not good enough. You know an emergency or a valid situation, I think, when you see one. Okay? Getting out of town on vacation on time isn't it, right? But I think there's no real definition here, so I can't give you too many more bright lines, except I think we know that important situation when we see one. Okay? When in doubt, that's when you make some phone calls. Now, I have to swing out to Chapter 985 here. And this is where you see a lot of mistakes for self-described experts in open meeting law who don't actually know any municipal law, okay? Because that's what Chapter 985 is. It's a little bit of, it's hiding in the background there. Chapter 985 has a lot of important definitions that go into what legal notices are. This is the legal notices chapter. Number 1 here, Sundays and legal holidays do not count for calculating 24 hours. What does that mean? If you want to have a meeting on Monday, you cannot post a notice on Sunday and have that count as being at least 24 hours. Same thing for a legal holiday. You cannot post a notice on Christmas Day and expect to have a legal meeting the day after Christmas. That will not work. Okay? So if you need to have that meeting on Monday, it better be posted at least on Saturday before. And that's because the terms in the statute is defined in hours. And when it's defined in hours, that rule applies. That's from Chapter 985. Next, nobody reads the paper, or there is no paper. Can't we use the shopper? Everyone gets that thing. Well, you can put it in there, guys. You can put it in there. Same thing with your website. And it's great to see websites out there. You can do as much notice as you want. Please do it to your heart's content. I've given you the minimums. Okay? You can absolutely do more. Go right ahead. But these things, shoppers, websites, don't actually count. They don't fulfill any legal requirement. So I think it's good governance to do more than is the minimum. That's great. But just this is not a replacement for anything else. So your websites, your shoppers, they do not count. Newspaper is a defined word in Chapter 985. A newspaper is a newspaper. All right? Affidavits of notice are recommended. If you're doing a newspaper ad, it's not too hard to figure out whether it showed up or not, right? But if you're doing postings, and this happens, someone claims that the posting was gone. How do you prove that you posted? One thing that you can do is you can have an affidavit of posting. You can just have a slip of paper. It says, I, so-and-so, the clerk, posted the notices when, where around town. You got an affidavit then. So if you're at some meeting and someone says, hey, I didn't see it up there. Well, at least you've got your affidavit that you made at the time, and it's considered presumptive proof that you did it. Okay? So affidavits and notice, again, I'm sure barely anyone's doing them, but it's just a good practice thing if you want to get going and cover your bases. The official newspaper business. People get confused about this. There are entities that are required to have a newspaper. The state, for example, has an official newspaper. I believe cities and counties do as well. Don't quote me, I'm a town guy. Towns and villages do not, all right? Almost none of them are required to have an official newspaper. You can if you want. Is there a point to it? I say no. Okay? A lot of people misunderstand what it means. A lot of people think if you have an official newspaper, you absolutely have to have a newspaper ad and you can't use posting places instead. Not true. If you have an official newspaper, what it means is if you decide to use a newspaper for anything, you have to use that one. That's all it means. So is there any real point to having one designated if you don't have to? Not really. Second, and this is where people get tripped up on Chapter 985. In the statutes, it always says publish a notice, publish a notice. And you get people who say, well, these postings, you didn't publish anything, so you violated the law. Not true. It's in Chapter 985 where it says, basically, if you don't have to have an official newspaper, you can post instead of publish if you want. That's where it comes from. Finally, this is why I discourage newspapers. Maybe I'll be in a headline tomorrow, right? When the newspaper is screwed up, too bad for you. And I hear about this periodically. It happens. Stuff happens, you know. They're human people. Okay, if they forget to run your ad and that's all you did for notice, you can't have your meeting. That's it. When they make a big mistake in the ad, which happens probably even more often, you know, they put Tuesday instead of Wednesday, put the wrong date. You were trying to notice a town meeting of the electors and they said town board meeting instead. You are stuck. You are stuck. So, if you can do posting places, use posting places. It's within your control. You have a lot more flexibility. Because you could have your postings up, and I'm sure most people aren't doing 24 hours in advance every time. You're doing a week or two. What if something changes? Change your postings as long as it's within 24 hours. And you're still legal. If you're using especially one of these weekly newspapers and the ad's been run and now something else came up, well, you're stuck. Okay? So keeping that within your control and the flexibility to make changes and not being held to someone else's mistake are all really good reasons to use postings and get away from the newspaper. Now, I do encourage you can do both. Like I said, you can do more than the minimum. Don't worry about that. But what I say, if you're going to run that newspaper ad in addition, what I like to say to keep your flexibility is put a disclaimer in that ad that says, you know, see the posting places for official notice or something. Because that way there's no confusion as to what's going to be the most current official notice. One of the things in Chapter 985 is it defines insertions. It defines Class 1, Class 2, Class 3 notice. And a Class 2 notice would require the first notice to go out at least 2 weeks in advance. And it would require the second notice to go out at least the week before. And notice how I hedged on that definition a little bit because the statute hedges. As long as it appears in that week before, did it still make it, right? I think it probably would under the strict terms of the statute, but I say that as someone who does municipal law for a living, okay? Prosecutors and judges do not. So here's my recommendation. Get the first one at least 2 weeks in advance, get the second one at least a week in advance, okay? Not everyone's municipal lawyers like us and these guys. Good question. Closed session. So, a couple notes about closed session. You are never, ever required to use closed session. You hear that one a lot. When are we required to? Or so-and-so says we're required to. Well, here's your answer. You are never required to use it. Don't have to use it. Not necessarily wise to never use it, but you never have to, so keep that in mind. A lot of people ask, who's able to attend a closed session? There's only one set of people that are guaranteed absolutely to be able to attend the closed session. That's the members of the body. So other officers, town officers, village officers that are not a member of the board, they don't have to let you be in there. Now, they usually are anyway, which is not bad practice, okay? But just to be clear, members of the body are the only ones entitled. Now, members of the body can basically invite in anyone else they want. So if they want to talk to someone in closed session for a valid reason, they can bring that person in, or multiple people, okay? So that's who's entitled to attend. They can invite anyone else they want. FYI, if the clerk isn't there, someone else has to take minutes. Because you do take minutes in closed session. Now what happens to those minutes? Because it's closed session. This crosses over into public records law a little bit, but just to answer that question since we're here, you'll probably seal those up and keep those separately in the file. And most minutes in closed session do eventually become open record, public record. When is that? When the reason that you had to close session no longer exists, that can be open. So, one of the examples, there's a list of reasons that you can have closed session in the statutes there. One of the exemptions is meeting with your municipal attorney about impending or ongoing litigation. Okay, that's one of the exemptions. You're having an ongoing litigation. The litigation ends. The case is over. It's been settled, or the Supreme Court denied review. It's just done. Okay, when it's finally done, those meeting minutes you had in closed session about that case, they're public record now. So then you can take them out of the envelope and put them back in the open file. The one exception is probably personnel discussions. Employee evaluation, that type of stuff, that probably will always stay closed. That's the one exception, really. So, about these exemptions, there's several of them listed. Some are more commonly used than others. Most common is probably employee evaluation, although the lawsuits do come up. There's a couple other reasons in there. Exemptions are very narrowly construed. What does that mean? It means they're not interpreted broadly. Narrowly construed, remember? So that example I used about meeting with the attorney about impending or ongoing litigation, do you think you can have that meeting in closed session if the attorney isn't there? Doesn't sound like it, right? Narrowly construed, guys. You are going to have to pay the attorney sometimes. Okay? So, let's go over the procedure for closed session. First of all, you always start in open session. Every meeting you're going to have is going to start in open session. Even if closed session is the only thing on the agenda, you're going to show up and begin in open session. When you get to the closed session portion of the agenda, here's what you do. You've got your properly noticed agenda, and it's going to have two things. It's going to have the exact subsection of the statute that applies to your subject matter, and then you're going to have to list the subject matter specifically enough that someone can tell that it would apply to that particular exemption. So both things there. You're going to have some specifics as to what you're talking about. At this point, when you get to there on the agenda, the chair is going to announce that agenda item and the subsection of the statute. They have to say out loud what both things are. Then they have to ask for a roll call motion to go in the closed session. Roll call means everyone's vote whichever way gets recorded in the minutes. If that motion passes, you go into closed session. If it doesn't pass, you can't. So why is there a roll call vote? Well, if you had an improper closed session, vote against it. That way you're in the record as voting that you thought it was a bad idea. If it turns out you get fined later, you can't get in trouble because you voted no. And if you vote no and the vote still passes, you still get to participate. Because remember, all members of the body are entitled to be there, even if you vote no. So if you think it's wrong, not according to law, you vote no. If the vote passes anyway, you still get to go be there. Okay? So that's the procedure. One other thing on the agenda you got to have, though. You want to note on the agenda whether you're going to adjourn in closed session, the meeting's over, you're going to adjourn, everyone goes home, or you're actually going to meet back in open session again. You might have a closed session discussion. Most things in closed session you cannot act with a finality in closed session. You can adopt a position about what you're going to do, but usually final action has to be in open session. So you might have a discussion, come back in open session, and make your motion on just the final decision right there. You might be doing it at a later time. So basically, the public just needs to know whether they should go home or stick around in case you might come back. Just think of it that way. So note on your agenda whether you're going to stop there or come back. Enforcement. We always save the best stuff for last. Complaints. Complaints are made to your county district attorney. Then you have to wait at least 20 days while they consider whether they'll do anything or not. This is step one. Folks, it's going to take longer than 20 days for the DA to get around to looking at your complaint about open meeting law violation. All right? Wait longer than 20 days. The DA does not have to bring an action. They do not have to. If the 20 days has expired, there's been no DA action, you can complain to the state attorney general. The state attorney general very rarely enforces this stuff directly. It would have to be something that they think is just really groundbreaking on a statewide type of level for them to come over to your county and enforce it there. So extremely rare, not really going to happen. What's most common here for a complaint is not really a DA, but a private party can bring an action. Once that 20 days has passed and the DA hasn't done anything, you can bring a private action. So you sue the municipal official in court for a violation. This is actually fairly common as far as suing or complaints go. I just want to make sure you understand the legal standard here. You are guilty till proven innocent. Okay? You need to understand that. Remember when I talked about how if you have so many board members in one place at one time, it's presumed to be a meeting? So if it's presumed to be a meeting and no notice was made, it's presumed to be a violation. So you would have to, if you get a complaint tonight because you got a quorum here, you would have to proffer that exception to the statute, but I was attending a conference and we did not discuss any other municipal business. Okay? Now the NSA is everywhere, but unlikely that they're bugging this meeting right here. What do we say? Don't buy a grater on the way home that hasn't been discussed in a public meeting, right? Come on, you know what I mean? That's when you know you're going to be in trouble. Other than that, your cars are probably not bugged. But you are fairly on your honor here. Don't discuss the municipal business. Remember, the exception does not apply when otherwise intended to avoid the subchapter, right? So if you start talking about municipal business anyway, you're still going to violate the law. And that's going to be real apparent if some sort of action occurs that was never discussed at a meeting, okay? So that's just the way that is. Guilty till proven innocent. I got to tell you, most violations are accidental. Remember the three-part process for open meeting law, and everyone forgets step 3, okay? First of all, stop forgetting step 3. Second, there is some understanding from law enforcement on most occasions. I think the most common way these things get worked out for an accident is that you get basically ordered to get some training and it'll go away. Okay, I've seen that many times. I have not seen that every time. I have seen fines for nothing more than forgetting step 3 of the three-part process. If someone wants to do that, you are guilty, okay? It's that simple. If you are guilty, you have to pay a personal fine of anywhere from $25 to $300. That has to be out of pocket. Your municipality cannot pay that fine for you. So what do? And maybe you've seen this and didn't realize what it was, and maybe you haven't, and I recommend you start doing it. First thing you do when the meeting comes to order is say, was this meeting properly noticed? Get that in the record. Get that in the minutes. Well, how did you notice it? Well, I posted to 3 places. Here's my affidavit of posting. Did you send it to the paper or something? Yep, send them an email. All right, let's have the meeting. That you may have seen that before and didn't realize, but that's what it is. Before you even have the meeting, just ask, what was the meeting noticed properly? What'd you do? Get that explanation if you need it. Now you're comfortable, can go forward. Okay? The end. Well, here's some resources. Local Government Center publications, that's the other material. That's the website where you can find that. The plain language 10-page handout. It's good for you. It's good for anyone of your citizens that have questions and want to learn about it. Department of Justice has a very long guide on open meeting law. The problem with the Department of Justice publication is that it's written for guys like me, not guys like you. Okay? I gave you the one that you're more likely to appreciate and understand. Your municipal association, most likely you're here for a reason. You're a local official. All of these associations exist to help our officials. That's why we're involved in doing the education. We work with Local Government Center to do a lot of that. And this really is the end. So, do you have questions? Yes, sir. Okay, he's got a 2-part question. This gentleman tells me that his 3-person town board intends to attend the Wisconsin Towns Association convention. Bless your hearts. Come on down. It's in Madison this year, end of the month. Anyway, thanks for the plug. So his question is, we all drive separately to the convention, and we're attending the convention. We're going to run into each other. You're attending a conference. That's the conference exception. Don't buy a grader on the way home. Now his 2-part question was, how about we carpool? The 3 of us are all going to be in one vehicle. Here's your issue. You've got a quorum in one place at one time with no notice. It's a presumed violation if someone wants a complaint. Okay? So you're on your honor there not to be discussing town business. You're going to have to discuss the Packers or something else and not come home with a grader. Okay? So it is legal. You're on your way to attend a conference. All right? I think that exception applies. But and it's common. Come on, we carpool. Saves gas. I see it all the time. But I also see town officers who are not carpooling. All right? And why is that? Here's why. Sometimes you get that person in your community who's going to complain about everything they can find to possibly complain about. And, every 1 in a million complaints, you may have accidentally, done something. Or, that presumed violation, that 3 people in one place at one time. If that's the situation in your town, do not be carpooling for a while. That's all I can tell you. It's the unreasonable person standard. Good question. We're talking about the part 3 of the 3-part open meeting law notice for every meeting. That email he sends to the newspaper, do they have to publish it? No. Under step 3, where you're just giving them the heads up notice, they don't have to do anything with that. You don't have to pay them anything for that. That's just step 3, a heads up to a news medium. That's all it is. So you've separately, under step 1, done your notice to the public. Okay? So yeah, they don't have to do anything with it, and you don't have to pay them anything for it. You just got to do it. Interesting. No. His question is a rabble rouser with their own blog a member of the news media? No, I mean, no. First of all, that's step 2, all right? You have to be a credentialed member of the press which I'm sure isn't that difficult, but a reporter is a reporter and other people aren't. And, that's step 2 if they have a written request. But remember how I said shoppers and websites don't count for open meeting law notice? Newspapers are defined, for example, okay? And all those online newspapers, those are still newspapers. That's just their website. All right? It's a good question. No, I would not say so. Any others? Otherwise, it's almost midnight. All right, I'll stick around if you have other questions, but thanks for having me.